Right friends, welcome back to Learning Space. This is an honest analysis of Civil Services Preliminary 2022 examination. Friends, as far as GS1 is concerned, there are 100 questions, out of which 20 pertains to history. I cannot comment about history. If you exclude history, there are 80 questions. Out of 80 questions, around 50 to 55 questions are linked with current events, and out of these 50 to 55 questions, at least 20 questions are very simple, and there are around 15 questions which requires conceptual clarity, especially in economy, and that will make a difference whether to qualify or not qualifying. That means the conceptual questions. Let me repeat. History I am not looking at. Other than history, there are around 80 questions, and out of 80 questions, there are around 15 to 20 questions pertaining to conceptual clarity, and out of these questions, around 7-8 questions pertains to economy, which requires conceptual clarity, and these will determine whether you are qualifying or not. So friends, around 20 to 25 questions are very simple, and if you look at the honest analysis, what I have done is I have taken this paper, I segregated complete static questions and complete dynamic questions. I could find around 50 to 55 questions out of this total 100 which are linked one way or the other with the current affairs. And out of these around 55 questions, 4 to 5 questions I could not answer, because those 4 to 5 questions out of 55 I could not recollect. For example, Gandikota Reservoir I might have taught, but I couldn't recollect that. At the same time, Ramanuja statue, after it was inaugurated, I have not taught with regard to the philosophy of Ramanuja. Similarly, the temple in Gujarat, like that, there are around 4-5 aspects. DNA bar coding, I have not taught. Though DNA fingerprinting, half-life, all these were taught. Like that, hardly there are around 4 to 5 questions which I could not answer, and remaining 50 questions I have gone through question by question and I attempted them to answer. Whether you believe or not, I answered 48 straight away out of 50 questions. That means from my lectures, or you can say from the lectures of Learning Space Digital during the past 1.5 years, if you see, I have simply taken one by one the dynamic questions. As I have already told you, out of 55, I could not recollect or I could not have taught around 4 to 5 questions. Remaining, there are 50 questions. Simply by reading through these questions, I have gone from one end to the other end by simply answering the answers. And whether you believe it or not, out of these 50, I could answer 48 questions correctly, and only 2 questions there was some sort of confusion, right? So friends, the paper, those whoever are following Learning Space Digital, they can get direct or indirect advantage. So that is the precise reason why this video is titled Huge Competitive Edge with Learning Space. Friends, if you look at editorial discussions, weekly 3 editorial discussions, weekly 2 current affairs, and total time is around 3.5 hours per week. And this 3.5 hours of week, if you watch, it gives you extremely very high competitive edge, which is evident from this particular paper. And if you see, I listed here because this is how I felt, because I am teaching current affairs for the past 4-5 years. And because of my experience, as I have already told you, out of 50 questions, straight away I answered 48 questions. After that, I cross-checked with various keys and all 48 are correct. So therefore, conceptual clarity, and as I have already told you, around 15 questions or so, without conceptual clarity, you cannot answer. And that is where editorial discussions comes into picture. In editorial discussions, if you see capital flight, if you see various aspects pertaining to inflation, all these things were deliberated number of times, including near, rear, and several of them were discussed in the cohort sessions. One more important aspect is, many of you might have ignored last minute revision and cohort sessions. But the pertinent point to note down here is, last minute revision and cohort sessions, they benefited immensely. In fact, when I am answering the dynamic aspects, several aspects I can recollect from the last minute revision as well as cohort sessions. And the next important thing is, in the last minute revision and random thoughts, there are several statements which are nearly carried forward to UPSC. Or you can say, whatever UPSC statements are there, at least 15 to 20 statements, you can trace their footprint to Learning Space Digital, especially during the past 2-3 months. So I can say there is immense benefit. And as I have already told you, the 15 questions of conceptual clarity that make or break your future progress. Because around 20 to 25 questions are very, very simple. Anyone can answer those questions. I cannot comment about history. Polity are also relatively easy. And around 15 conceptual questions will determine your journey and where the editorial discussions and current affairs comes into picture. And as I am teaching editorial discussions, I found them dead easy when even answering the conceptual questions. This is what I felt, and I am speaking from my heart. There is nothing exaggeration in this, and I have given various testimonials with regard to where I taught, and they are coming under which series. All those things I mentioned in this particular article, right? So footprint of at least 50 questions only from dynamic aspects. As I have already told you, 4 to 5 questions more I missed somehow. And from LSD lectures only, there are 50 questions at least as far as dynamic aspects are concerned. And these are for the past 1.5 years. Friends, if you watch repeatedly editorial discussions regularly, you will find them very easy to answer such questions. For example, question pertaining to Vietnam, question pertaining to tea board. All these things are deliberated in the editorial discussions from time to time. And contempt of court, that was discussed number of times. Anti-defection, you should not find any problem, right? And here, from the student's perspective, let me speak. I answered 48 questions out of 50 straight away, but as a student, you may find difficulty in eliminating at least 8 to 10 questions. I fully admit that, but still there is a huge competitive edge. Especially you get the competitive edge for these conceptual questions. Exclusive competitive edge for at least 15 questions. Directly at least 15 to 20 statements of last minute revision or random thoughts appear in the paper. Almost synonymous statements. Then cohort sessions, they immensely benefited. You just check this document till the end. You can see how many questions came from cohort. And friends, some of the questions with simple common sense you can answer. Suppose nanoparticles. We discussed in the cohort. And all the 3 statements were not taught by me. But with common sense, you can simply eliminate one. So like that, you should not feel any difficulty. Out of 50, those whoever are following regularly editorials, and most of you are doing the same mistake of going at 2x or 1.5x. Several students, what they do is, simply for the sake of covering, they just go through at 1.5x, 2x. It doesn't work. You have to think twice. There are several questions. I will come to those questions which requires some sort of action from your mind, right? And overall, those following learning space. And what I have seen is several students have taken cohort sessions, last minute revision lightly. But you see, out of these 50 questions, around 30 questions directly appeared from cohort sessions and last minute revision. And I don't take any credit as far as simple questions are concerned. Most of you are well aware, but the question comes when there is some competitive edge pertaining to conceptual clarity related questions, right? And these 50 dynamic aspects I mentioned here. And if you go briefly, rear and near, I discussed a number of times. In fact, in the last minute revision also, I added several statements. And while answering this question, those who ever followed all the lectures, it will be cakewalk for them. Otherwise, what happens? They may go wrong in this, particularly this near and rear. Then RBI purchasing and selling dollars and inflation in USA and Eurozone. This also requires conceptual clarity. Then inflation indexed bonds. I deliberated in the cohort session. And it is very easy. Then marketplace model and inventory model. These two words are familiar to the students. Whoever are watching editorial discussions, there is a question from marketplace model and inventory model. And indirect transfers, there is one question pertaining to indirect transfers. Those who have watched editorial discussions, especially Cairn taxation case, at the same time Vodafone taxation case, with regard to retrospective taxation, I presented 3 editorials in 2021, and those who have watched, they can easily answer this indirect transfers. But most of the students, what they are doing is, they are not watching regularly, at least some of the students. What they are doing is just at the end, they are going at 1.5x, 2x. Don't do that. What happens is many students repeat the same mistake. Now exam is over for 3-4 months. There will be lull. After that, they take some test series, try to answer as many test series as possible. And test series will certainly benefit you as far as certain questions are concerned. And the important aspect is, through test series, you may not be able to answer the conceptual clarity related questions. You can answer only conceptual clarity related questions when you go through the editorials. Because I am repeating number of times. If you look at this particular near rear, I repeated number of times. At the same time, RBI purchasing dollars, selling the dollars, inflation in Eurozone, inflation in United States of America, what is its impact, what is capital flight, all these things I discussed in editorial discussions around 5 to 6 times during the past 1 year. But how many of you have gone through in detail? So friends, for answering certain questions, what is important is you have to have conceptual clarity, and if you follow regularly editorials, another important thing is if you follow regularly editorials, some of the things, though not directly mentioned, you can answer questions like tea board, coffee board. I told in one of the editorials that tea board, coffee board, these are under the Ministry of Commerce. And at the same time, I talked about these boards are nearer to their production centers. They are for trade promotion. And tea board question you can answer. Another one is, in general, which of the state is considered tea producing state? Friends, to answer that in general, that is very, very important. And at the same time, I talked about which are the tea producing states. And you can easily get that answer. Levant. I talked about ISIL. Suppose to answer this, I talked about ISIL. ISIL means the last one L is Levant region. So Syria, that means Eastern Mediterranean region. Such type of things you can easily answer. Sri cultivation of rice, rice and methane emissions. These things we have already deliberated. When rice alternate wetting and drying is done, then nitrous oxide emissions takes place. And like that, this anti-defection law, we told the biggest drawback of anti-defection law is there is no specific time frame as far as the speaker's decision is concerned, and courts can come into picture. Only speaker took the decision. Such type of things you can get from editorials. right? Contempt of Courts Act, then debt financing, equity financing, debt and equity. Foreign portfolio investments can come into debt and equity, and these are nothing but foreign portfolio investments are capital flows. When I am talking about capital, this question can be easily answered. Why I am taking some examples is the power of editorial discussions. And when you are going at 1.5x, when you are just simply going through the PPTs, that won't work. Before the starting of current affairs, before the starting of editorial discussions, I used to talk about many things. Several of them were reflected in this particular paper, right? And rice and methane emissions. Then Sri cultivation of rice. These are all told orally when I am talking about editorial discussion. Because each editorial discussion, I touch upon many things. Just look at this Web 3.0. And many of you may not be aware about it. I discussed this in the cohort session. And at the same time, of course, quantum computers, qubit, that is very simple. And RFID, this WLAN, these are all I discussed in the cohort session. Probiotics. But here, simple common sense is required. To answer this question, I discussed about probiotics not only in the cohort session but also in the last minute revision. COVID vaccines, of course, it should be a cakewalk for those whoever are watching editorial discussions. Solar flares in the cohort sessions, at the same time in the editorial, solar maximum, solar minimum, like that. There also we deliberated about it. Climate action tracker. Friends, those who are following Trend Stock, I used to show so many images. These images are of this climate action tracker. And wetlands are like kidneys. I told a number of times, wetlands are like kidneys. Kidneys means, what is the purpose? If you look at the question, if you infer that, you can answer that. Like that, friends. I need not talk about each and every question. There are several simple questions like biorocks, Miyawaki, and golden mahseer fish. I deliberated about this. And like that, credit rating agencies, credit information companies, the difference I told umpteen number of times. Convertible bonds, what are the advantages? MTCR, India is member of MTCR, that also I talked about. And like that, just have a glance at it. And ISA observer status with UN, in that context I talked about observer. Friends, these 50 questions, you may feel exaggeration, but I answered 48 questions. And I hope those who followed, at least they can answer 35 questions out of this 50. Because the issue here is conceptual clarity and remembering them. When you watch the editorials frequently, remembrance will increase because I am repeating number of times. This particular one, very easy one, and that is of IMF. And this was talked about in the editorials number of times when we are discussing editorials. And near and rear, this is in fact, there is one statement here in the last minute revision. Similarly, in the revision module, there is another statement. They are almost resembling what is given in this particular question. And now you can see the statement here in the current affairs of 22 February. And cohort session, we discussed number of times these aspects pertaining to RBI selling dollars, RBI purchasing dollars. And similarly, you can see here, this is also from the module 71. And like that, you can see, and I have taken from the past 1.5 years. And this is cohort session, this inflation indexed bonds. This is last minute revision module 6. There we talked about this particular statement, 100% FDI in marketplace model. Same statement is reflected here. And this inflation indexed bonds we discussed in the cohort sessions. And you can see here the same statement is reflected here. Like that, you can see any number of examples. So before going in each question by question, it may not be possible. I have given here the testimonials. That means the final conclusion is those whoever are following, they get the required competitive advantage. Go through each and every slide. In fact, I talked about many things in these slides. Contempt of court, you can see here, a private person cannot file contempt. In fact, this can be easily answered those whoever are following learning space, and just have a glance at them. And this is about anti-defection law, which we discussed number of times in the editorial, and Ayushman Bharat digital mission. In fact, some of the slides also I kept here. This is about the anthropogenic emissions as far as rice is concerned, right? In fact, in the last minute revision also this statement was given. You can see here, because here the questions I have given, current affairs, most of them are recent. That means whatever I taught, most of them, 50 questions are there, around 40 questions. In fact, I taught during the past 5-6 months remaining in the year 2021. Then system of rice intensification. When I was discussing about greenhouse gas emissions, I talked about Shri in the editorials. And Levant region, this is IS, last S stands for this ISIL, the last L stands for Levant region. Then this is Afghanistan borders. In fact, we discussed in the cohort session also. And in the last minute revision maps, lastly I produced 4 modules. You can see here. And the next question is Web3. I talked about this in the cohort session. At the same time, Qubit, I talked about this in the cohort session. And of course, in several editorials, these were covered. And these things I discussed in the cohort session. And probiotics, there is one statement in the current affairs in module 31. At the same time, in the cohort session, I talked about probiotics, but here little bit of common sense is required to answer this question. That's why I told you, out of 50 questions, 8 to 10 questions require little bit of common sense, or the options may be tricky. And these vaccines, I need not explain. We discussed number of times, and through the elimination process, this is very easy. Then this one also we deliberated in detail about solar flares, coronal mass ejections, what happens because of that. All these things, not only in the cohort session, in the editorial, solar maximum, solar minimum, right? And this kidneys, wetlands act as kidneys. The same statement I talked about in the editorial. I gave the reason also. This is the right statement. And this is about WHO air quality guidelines. And friends, 2 important last minute revision statements I have given here. Just look at these statements. PM 2.5 and PM 10 are primarily produced due to the combustion of fuel, and both have the propensity to enter the bloodstream. This is wrong statement I have given. I already talked about at that point of time. PM 2.5, that goes inside the bloodstream. So here you see, among PM 2.5, PM 10 ozone, I already talked about in this statement, because it is wrong statement. Ozone that leads to, or you can say, impact on the asthma patients. Friends, about PM 2.5, which goes inside the bloodstream. Next, about ozone, which intensifies the asthma. And at the same time, the guidelines of this World Health Organization 5 and 15, I stressed upon in the cohort sessions. So friends, look at the next one. This is golden mahseer fish, and this I have taken from revision 2021 straight away. Then biorocks, this I have taken from revision 2021 straight away. That is protection or restoration of coral reefs. Miyawaki method, this I have taken from last minute revision straight away. That is the recent module. Then this monetary policy, I need not explain. Number of times we discussed in the editorials, current affairs, cohort sessions about capital flight, about monetary policy, about external commercial borrowings, about external debt. Then this is, of course, credit rating agencies. I told you umpteen number of times, credit rating agencies are regulated by the SEBI, whereas credit information companies are regulated by Reserve Bank of India. If you know that statement, through elimination process, answer becomes B. Then Banks Board Bureau, it is the governor of RBI is nothing to do with it. And we discussed this number of times. Then convertible bonds. This and these three Asian infrastructure, this is very simple question. In fact, in the cohort we talked about missile technology control regime also recently. And this is about Vietnam. I number of times discussed about Vietnam because it is becoming the another manufacturing powerhouse. We discussed in the editorial also around 1.5 years ago. At the same time, if you go through the trends talk also, because I have shown you a trends talk slide which talked about increasing exports from around $20 billion to $300 billion. Friends, when I am going through all these things, that is the precise reason why I am able to answer maximum questions from dynamic aspects. Why can't you answer if you follow me? That is the question I am asking. Then this is price stability, simple question, Reserve Bank of India. Non-fungible tokens. Friends, in the cohort I talked about fungible, non-fungible. One example I have taken, 100 rupee note. When I am giving you money 100 rupees, when I am taking back, you may not give the same 100 rupees. Here you see third statement which says equivalency. Equivalency will not work here. So therefore this is wrong. So 1 and 2 is correct. This aspect was discussed number of times about non-fungible tokens. Then this is in fact Labor Bureau. Those whoever are watching, they can answer. Fifth schedule, we already deliberated this in the cohort also. And the simple question, of course, that is option is A. Then comes this is UN General Assembly observer status. Why he asked this question? Because you see ISA got observer status. The same we discussed in the cohort session. At the same time, current affairs module 4, recent module of January, we discussed about it. And whatever asked, that is covered here, you can see. Right? And T-board in the editorial, those whoever are watching regularly, you can straight away answer this. Greenwashing. Friends, here I have to tell you one important aspect. Before starting current affairs, what I am doing is, I am making you learn 3 words. In those words, one day I talked about brainwashing, greenwashing, like the 3 words. And this is the simple question. The next one is UNCOLS, that is UNCLOS. This UNCLOS is quite familiar, and with this type of maps, learning space explained you number of times. It is very simple question. Then Senkaku Islands. About these islands, in the last minute revision maps, a few days ago, I talked about this. Then this, of course, through elimination process, you may find it difficult because Anatolia region, I talked about around 2 years ago. Amhara, of course, this was taught only 2 months ago. Amhara, that belongs to Ethiopia, but you may find it difficulty with regard to Turkey. And Catalonia, most of you are well aware. Catalonia is of Spain. So therefore, when some other area is pertaining to this Spain, you may not have such type of question. So through elimination process, you can answer only 2 pairs. Wild animals, with regard to this 1972 Wildlife Protection Act, we deliberated in the cohort, but in the elimination process, you may find it difficult. Then B cells, T cells, we discussed very in depth, but the question asked here is shallow. You can easily answer this. Then nanoparticles, we discussed in the cohort. You can see here, out of these 50 questions, you will see at least 25 to 30 questions we discussed in the cohort sessions. But most of you ignored cohort sessions. Look at the importance. The day I am starting cohort sessions, I told you about the importance of cohort sessions and this simple elimination process, because here you see, other than those made by humans, nanoparticles do not exist in nature. This straight away becomes wrong. So through elimination process, this can be answered. And look at this. I told this gives you lot of competitive edge. This one, PM 2.5 into the bloodstream. How to get competitive edge? I will tell you around 8 to 10 questions I can recollect where I taught specifically. One is capital flight. I stressed upon number of times. Second one is this PM 2.5 going into the bloodstream whereas PM10 not. Then ozone. Ozone escalates the asthma attack. Then the fourth one is this particular example. Acid rain is caused because of both SOx and NOx emissions. And here also I made this statement. This is in last minute revision. So friends, such type of statements gives you the required competitive edge. Friends, when I am able to answer from the dynamic aspects, I have not gone through the entire paper because there are several static areas are there. Say for geography, say polity, say history, and those aspects I have not touched, and remaining aspects pertaining to dynamic are around 55 questions, where I taught during the past 1.5 years 50 questions, and out of this, when I was casually going through, I was able to answer 48. And of course, as a student, you may have difficulty in answering 8 to 10 questions, but even then, those who ever watched current affairs and editorials regularly, they will get the required competitive edge. So friends, what is the message from this paper? Dynamic aspects are equally important, just like static. Second suggestion with regard to whatever lessons we learned is, whenever something happens, Gandikota, there was some failure, some people died, and Ramanuja statue, temple in Gujarat. So whenever such things happens, try to go into the static elements. That is the second message. Third message is, when 20 to 25 questions are dead easy, then what happens? The final deciding factor will be the questions with the concepts. Here there are around 15 questions which have, or you can say, which require conceptual clarity. And those whoever are able to answer majority of those questions, they will be clearing the examination. So therefore, underlying message is, don't look for short-term gains. Just have long-term vision. And editorial discussions, current affairs, these are very, very important, not only from preliminary perspective, but also from mains perspective. And if you want to clear the preliminary examination, watch regularly prelims, this editorials as well as current affairs, both for prelims as well as for mains. You cannot separate them. Prelims, mains, interview, for all in a comprehensive way, you should watch current affairs and editorials. Don't segregate them. And at the same time, here you see conceptual questions will increase as we go forward. And don't get jubilant because of easy questions, because easy questions everyone will answer, and the difficulty lies in answering the conceptual questions. Right friends, with this let me conclude honest analysis. And as I have already told you, as a student, you may not recollect some of them, you may not be able to answer all of them, but if you follow regularly learning space lectures, at least the required competitive edge you will get. And those who couldn't perform well, please follow learning space lectures, because we are producing the best quality modules. And you can see directly several statements appeared in the UPSC paper from Learning Space Digital. Don't ignore anything. Trend stock, climate action tracker, that appeared from trend stock, whatever I taught. And current affairs, at the beginning I taught greenwashing, that appeared. ISIL, T-board, these were hidden in the editorial discussions. They were repeated number of times in the editorial discussions. They appeared. So therefore, if you continue to do only test series, if you continue to just skip, just watch, or just scroll down the PPTs, that will not work. High quality learning is essential for the civil services success. With these words, let me conclude this lecture. And as I have already announced, because of my personal engagement, I am going to start editorial discussions and current affairs from 20th June Monday. And meanwhile, the new students, aspirants, please watch current affairs and editorials from January onwards, because for UPSC, those whoever are writing next year, 1.5 year current affairs is very much essential. With these words, let me conclude, wishing you all the best in your future endeavors. Thank you. Thanks a lot.